The dust settled around the wagon wheels as Laura Adams pulled the reins tight, her knuckles white against the worn leather, knowing that if she did not find work in the next town, her 4-year-old son would go hungry for the third night in a row. The Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly on the trail leading into Victor, a small ranching town nestled in the Teton Valley, and she could feel the weight of every decision that had brought her to this desperate moment in the summer of 1882. Her husband had died 2 years ago from fever, leaving her with nothing but debts and a child to raise, and she had sold everything they owned just to make it this far west. The wagon creaked as it rolled down the main street of Victor, past the general store and the saloon, past faces that turned to stare at the lone woman with suspicious eyes. Laura kept her gaze forward, her son Thomas sleeping fitfully in the back among their few remaining possessions. She had heard that ranchers in this valley sometimes needed help, that the work was hard but the pay was fair, and she was not afraid of hard work. Her hands were already calloused from the months of taking in washing and mending, from the back-breaking labor of trying to keep a roof over their heads. She stopped the wagon outside a building with a faded sign that read Land Office and climbed down, her legs stiff from the long journey. A man inside directed her to the Keller Ranch, 5 miles north of town, where the owner was said to be looking for help with the upcoming cattle drive. Laura thanked him, bought a small loaf of bread with her last few coins, and headed back out into the heat. The Keller Ranch sprawled across the valley floor, a substantial spread with a sturdy ranch house, a large barn, and corrals that held dozens of cattle. Laura's heart hammered as she approached, rehearsing the words she would say, knowing she had to convince whoever owned this place that she was worth hiring despite being a woman. She pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and saw a tall man emerge from the barn, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Samuel Keller wiped the sweat from his brow and studied the wagon with curiosity. Visitors were rare this far from town, and he could see it was a woman driving, which was unusual enough to make him pause. He walked toward her with the easy gait of a man comfortable in his own space, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. As he got closer, he could see she was young, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that held a mixture of determination and desperation. "Can I help you?" Samuel asked, his voice deeper than Laura had expected. "I am looking for work," Laura said, climbing down from the wagon seat before he could offer to help. "I heard in town that you might need hands for the cattle drive." Samuel's eyes moved past her to the wagon, noting the sparse belongings, the worn condition of everything. "I need cowboys, not," he paused, trying to find a polite way to phrase it. "I can work as hard as any man," Laura interrupted, her chin lifting. "I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals, and I do not complain." A small voice called out from the wagon, "Mama." Samuel's eyebrows rose as a small boy sat up in the back of the wagon, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The child looked thin, his clothes patched and repatched, and something in Samuel's chest tightened at the sight. Laura turned quickly. "Hush, Thomas. Lie back down." "I am hungry, Mama." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Laura's face flushed, and she turned back to Samuel with desperate eyes. "Please. I will work for room and board, just enough to feed my son. I am a good worker, I swear it." Samuel Keller had built his ranch from nothing over the past 8 years, working himself to the bone, sleeping in the barn through harsh winters, going without so that he could buy more land, more cattle. At 32 years old, he had achieved what he had set out to do, but the ranch felt empty. He had always imagined he would have a family by now, a wife and children to fill the house he had built. But the right woman had never come along, and the years had slipped past faster than he had realized. Looking at this woman and her hungry child, Samuel made a decision that surprised even himself. "I do not need help in the house," he said slowly, watching her face fall. "But I do need help. The garden has gone to seed. The chickens are barely laying because nobody has time to tend them proper. And the bunkhouse where the ranch hands sleep could use a woman's touch with the cooking and mending." Laura's eyes widened. "You are offering me work?" "Room and board and a small wage," Samuel said. "There is a cabin out back, used to be for the foreman before he moved on. It is not much, but it is sound. You and your boy can stay there." "Thank you," Laura whispered, her voice breaking. "You will not regret this, I promise you." Samuel nodded toward the wagon. "Let us get you settled. The boy looks like he could use a meal." Within an hour, Laura and Thomas were installed in the small cabin. It was just one room with a sleeping loft, but it had a good stove, a table, 2 chairs, and a bed frame with a corn husk mattress. To Laura, who had been sleeping in the wagon for weeks, it looked like paradise. Samuel had brought over supplies from the main house: bread, butter, bacon, eggs, milk, and potatoes. "The hen house is behind the barn," Samuel said, setting the basket on the table. "Help yourself to eggs whenever you need them. Milk cow gets milked morning and evening. You are welcome to take what you need." Thomas watched Samuel with wide eyes, half hidden behind his mother's skirts. Samuel crouched down to the boy's level, making himself less intimidating. "How old are you, son?" Thomas held up 4 fingers. 4 years old. "That is a good age," Samuel said gently. "Do you like animals?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Well, I have got a barn cat that just had kittens. Maybe later your mama can bring you to see them." The boy's face lit up, and Laura felt tears prick her eyes at the simple kindness. It had been so long since anyone had shown them any consideration. That evening, after Thomas was asleep in the loft, full for the first time in days, Laura stood outside the cabin and looked up at the stars. The Wyoming sky was vast and clear, the Milky Way a river of light overhead. She heard footsteps and turned to see Samuel approaching, a lantern in his hand. "Just checking that you have everything you need," he said. "More than enough," Laura replied. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Keller." "Samuel," he corrected. "We do not stand on formality much out here." "Samuel," she repeated. "I am Laura." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the night: cattle lowing in the distance, the chirp of crickets, the soft hoot of an owl. "Your husband?" Samuel asked quietly. "Dead 2 years," Laura said. "Fever took him fast. We had a small farm in Nebraska, but the debts were more than I could manage alone. I sold everything and headed west, hoping to find a fresh start." Samuel nodded, understanding more than she said. The West was full of people running from bad luck, looking for second chances. "The work starts early. I will have one of the hands show you around tomorrow, introduce you to the routine." "I will be ready." Samuel hesitated, then said, "Your boy seems like a good child." "He is," Laura said, her voice warming. "He has been so brave through everything. He deserves better than I have been able to give him." "He has got a mother who loves him," Samuel said. "That counts for a lot." After he left, Laura went back inside and climbed up to the loft to check on Thomas. Her son slept peacefully, his belly full, his face relaxed in a way she had not seen in months. She kissed his forehead gently and whispered a prayer of thanks. The next morning, Laura woke before dawn and set to work. She found the chicken coop and collected eggs, discovered the milk cow patiently waiting in her stall, and began to explore the ranch. Samuel's spread was impressive. He ran about 300 head of cattle, had a dozen horses, and employed 5 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. The men were initially skeptical of having a woman around, but when Laura served them a breakfast of eggs, bacon, biscuits and gravy that was the best meal they had eaten in months. Their attitudes softened considerably. Thomas stayed close to his mother that first day, but Samuel made good on his promise and took the boy to see the kittens. Laura watched from the cabin doorway as the tall rancher knelt in the straw, showing her son the tiny mewling creatures, his voice patient and kind. Thomas's delighted laughter rang out, a sound Laura had not heard nearly enough of lately. The days fell into a rhythm. Laura worked from dawn until dusk, tending the garden, caring for the chickens, cooking for the ranch hands, and mending their clothes. She took pride in her work, determined to prove that Samuel's faith in her was not misplaced. Thomas explored the ranch under the watchful eyes of the hands, who took turns keeping the boy entertained and out of trouble. Samuel found himself watching Laura more than he intended. She moved with efficient grace, never wasting motion, and she had a way of making even the mundane tasks look purposeful. He noticed how she always saved the best portions of food for Thomas, how she mended her son's clothes with tiny, nearly invisible stitches while her own dress remained patched with whatever thread was at hand. Her devotion to the boy touched something deep in Samuel's heart. 3 weeks after Laura arrived, a late summer storm rolled through the valley. The rain came down in sheets, and the wind howled around the buildings. Laura had just finished putting Thomas to bed when she heard a frantic knocking at the cabin door. She opened it to find Samuel, drenched to the skin. "One of the mares is foaling," he said quickly. "Having trouble. I could use another pair of hands." Laura did not hesitate. She grabbed her shawl and followed him through the rain to the barn. Inside, a beautiful chestnut mare lay on her side in the straw, her breathing labored. Samuel had already laid out clean cloths and water, and he knelt beside the horse, his hands gentle as he examined her. "The foal is breech," he said grimly. "I need to turn it." Laura knelt on the mare's other side, stroking the animal's neck, murmuring soothing words. She had helped birth calves and foals back on the Nebraska farm, and she knew how dangerous this could be for both mother and baby. Samuel worked with careful concentration, his jaw tight, and Laura could see the strain in his face. "Easy, girl," Laura whispered to the mare. "You are doing fine. Just a little longer." Samuel's hands moved with practiced skill, and finally, after what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes, he said, "Got it. The foal is turned." The birth happened quickly after that. The foal slid into the world in a rush of fluid, and Samuel quickly cleared its nose and mouth. For a terrible moment, the tiny creature did not move, and Laura's heart clenched. Then it gave a shuddering breath and lifted its head. "Thank God," Samuel breathed. They worked together to clean the foal and help it to its feet. The mare, exhausted but alive, nuzzled her baby with gentle affection. Laura and Samuel stood back, watching, both of them soaked in rain and various fluids, but grinning with the satisfaction of a job well done. "You knew what you were doing," Samuel said, looking at Laura with new respect. "I grew up on a farm," Laura said. "My father raised horses before he passed. I have seen my share of difficult births." They walked back through the rain, which had lessened to a drizzle. At the cabin door, Samuel paused. "You did good tonight, Laura. I could not have managed without you." "I am glad I could help," she said, meeting his eyes. There was a moment of charged silence, something unspoken passing between them. Then Samuel cleared his throat and stepped back. "You should get out of those wet clothes before you catch cold. Good night." "Good night, Samuel." Laura changed into dry clothes and checked on Thomas, who had slept through the entire drama. She lay awake for a long time, thinking about the way Samuel had looked at her in the barn, the way her heart had skipped when their hands accidentally brushed while tending the foal. As summer turned to fall, the connection between Laura and Samuel deepened. They found excuses to talk, small moments throughout the day when their paths would cross. Samuel started taking his morning coffee on the porch of the main house at the same time Laura came to collect eggs, and they would exchange a few words about the weather, the livestock, Thomas's latest antics. Those brief conversations became the highlights of Samuel's days. Thomas, for his part, had attached himself to Samuel with the wholehearted devotion of a child starved for a father figure. He followed the rancher around whenever allowed, asking endless questions, helping with small tasks, his face always lit with hero worship. Samuel found himself responding to the boy's affection, teaching him about horses and cattle, showing him how to rope a fence post, lifting him onto the back of a gentle mare and leading them around the corral. The ranch hands noticed and exchanged knowing looks. "Boss has got himself a family whether he knows it or not," the oldest hand, a weathered cowboy named Pete, said one evening. In October, Samuel had to make a trip to town for supplies. He asked Laura if she and Thomas would like to come along, and the delight on her face made his heart lift. They set out early in the morning, Thomas bouncing with excitement on the wagon seat between them. Victor was bustling with activity when they arrived. Samuel conducted his business at the feed store and the blacksmith, while Laura went to the general store. She had been saving every penny of her wages, and she wanted to buy Thomas new clothes. The boy had grown in the months they had been at the ranch, and his sleeves and pant legs were becoming scandalously short. In the general store, Laura was examining fabric when she heard a familiar voice. "Well, if it is not Laura Adams, heard you landed on your feet." She turned to see Margaret Hayes, a woman she had known briefly when they first arrived in Wyoming. Margaret ran a boarding house in town and had a reputation for knowing everyone's business. "Hello, Margaret," Laura said politely. "Working for Samuel Keller, I hear," Margaret said, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Living out at his ranch with your boy." "I work for him, yes," Laura said, hearing the insinuation in Margaret's tone. "Mighty convenient, a single woman and a single man out there all alone," Margaret said. Laura's cheeks flushed. "I work hard for my wages, and Mr. Keller has been nothing but respectful. I would thank you not to imply otherwise." "No offense meant," Margaret said, though her smile suggested otherwise. "Just seems like it might lead somewhere if you catch my meaning. Samuel Keller is one of the most eligible bachelors in the valley. Plenty of women have tried to catch his eye." Laura purchased her goods and left quickly, her good mood soured. But Margaret's words stayed with her, making her think about things she had been trying not to examine too closely. Was she developing feelings for Samuel? And if so, what could possibly come of it? She was a widow with a child, working as a hired hand. He was a successful rancher who could have his pick of women. When she met Samuel back at the wagon, he took one look at her face and frowned. "What happened?" "Nothing," Laura said, not wanting to repeat the conversation. "Laura," she sighed, "just some gossip, it does not matter." Samuel's jaw tightened. "What kind of gossip? About us? About it being inappropriate, me living on your ranch?" "That is ridiculous," Samuel said, anger flashing in his eyes. "You have done nothing wrong. Let people talk. They are small-minded and have nothing better to do." But the words had planted a seed of doubt in Laura's mind. That evening, after they returned to the ranch, she was quieter than usual. Thomas ran off to play with the kittens, now half-grown cats, and Laura stood by the corral watching the horses. Samuel found her there as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You have been quiet since town," he said. "I have been thinking," Laura said slowly. "Maybe I should look for work in Victor, a position in town where there would not be any question of impropriety." Samuel felt as if she had punched him in the gut. "Is that what you want?" "I want to protect my son," Laura said. "I do not want him growing up with people whispering about his mother." Thomas is happy here, Samuel said. You are happy here, I can see it. Happiness is not always enough, Laura said sadly. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, what if there was a way to stop the gossip? To make it so nobody could question your place here. Laura turned to look at him, her heart suddenly racing. What do you mean? Samuel took a deep breath, knowing he was about to risk everything. I have been alone for a long time, Laura. Built this ranch with my own 2 hands, told myself that was enough. But since you came here, the ranch has felt like a home instead of just a place I work. Thomas has brought life to this place. You have brought life to me. Samuel, Laura whispered, tears pricking her eyes. I know this is fast, he continued. I know we have only known each other a few months, but I also know that I look forward to seeing you every morning, that I make excuses to walk past the cabin just hoping to catch a glimpse of you, that I lie awake at night thinking about what it would be like to have you as more than just someone who works for me. I have a son from before, Laura whispered, needing him to understand what he would be taking on. Thomas is part of me. I cannot separate from him. Samuel stepped closer, his eyes intense. Now I have a son too, he said. If you will have me, if you will marry me, Laura, Thomas would be my son. I would raise him as my own, love him as my own. I already do. Laura's breath caught. She had not dared to hope for this, had not let herself imagine that a man like Samuel could want a ready-made family. You mean that? Every word, Samuel said. I am not a fancy man, Laura. I cannot offer you balls and parties. But I can offer you a home, security, and a man who will spend every day trying to make you happy. You and Thomas both. Yes, Laura said, tears streaming down her face now. Yes, Samuel, yes. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, feeling the strength of him, the steadiness that had drawn her from the first. They stood there in the fading light, holding each other, 2 people who had been alone finding solace together. Thomas came running around the corner of the barn and stopped short, seeing his mother in Samuel's embrace, his little face scrunched up with confusion. Mama, Laura pulled back and held out her hand to her son. Come here, sweetheart. Thomas came slowly and Samuel crouched down to his level again. Thomas, how would you feel about me marrying your mama, about us all being a family together? Would you be my papa? Thomas asked, his voice small. If you would like that, Samuel said gently, I would be proud to be your papa. Thomas considered this seriously, his 4-year-old brain working through the implications. Then he launched himself at Samuel, his small arms wrapping around the rancher's neck. I want you to be my papa. Samuel closed his eyes, holding the boy tight, feeling something in his chest that had been broken for a long time finally heal. Over Thomas's head, he met Laura's eyes and saw his own joy reflected there. They were married 3 weeks later in Victor's small church. The ranch hands came, dressed in their Sunday best, and a few townspeople attended out of curiosity. Margaret Hayes was there, her face pinched with envy. Laura wore a simple blue dress that Samuel had bought for her, the finest thing she had ever owned, and she carried wildflowers that Thomas had helped pick that morning, when the preacher asked if Samuel took Laura to be his wife. His "I do" rang out strong and clear. When it was Laura's turn, her voice shook with emotion, but the words were firm. I do. Samuel kissed her in front of the whole congregation, a chaste press of lips that nonetheless promised more. Thomas stood beside them, holding the ring that Samuel had given Laura, beaming with pride. The wedding night was awkward at first. Laura had only been with one man, her late husband, and that had been years ago. Samuel had not been with anyone in even longer, and he was nervous about disappointing her. But they worked through the awkwardness together, with gentle touches and whispered reassurances. And by the time dawn broke, they lay tangled together in Samuel's bed, now their bed, both marveling at the rightness of it. "I never thought I would have this," Samuel murmured, his hand stroking Laura's hair. "A wife, a son, a real family." "Thomas asked me last night if you would love him like a real papa," Laura said softly. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you already do." Samuel kissed her forehead. "He is my son now, in every way that matters." The first few months of marriage were an adjustment for all of them. Thomas moved into the main house with Samuel and Laura, delighting in having a real bedroom of his own. Samuel taught the boy his letters in the evenings, patient even when Thomas got frustrated. Laura filled the house with cooking smells and laughter, making curtains for the windows, planting flowers in boxes by the door. Winter came hard that year. The snow piled high, and the temperatures dropped below zero. The ranch hands worked in shifts to keep the cattle from freezing, breaking ice on the water troughs, hauling hay to the stranded animals. Samuel was gone from dawn until long after dark most days, and Laura worried about him, saw the exhaustion in his face when he finally came home. One particularly brutal night in January, Samuel did not come home at all. Laura paced the floor, looking out the window into the whiteout conditions, her stomach tight with fear. Thomas picked up on her anxiety and could not sleep, so she held him on her lap by the fire, telling him stories to keep them both calm. Just before dawn, the door burst open and Samuel staggered in, covered in snow, his face gray with cold. Laura jumped up, settling Thomas in the chair, and rushed to help her husband. His clothes were frozen stiff, and his hands were so cold he could barely move his fingers. "Lost 3 head," he said through chattering teeth. "Pete is bringing in the hands. Storm is too dangerous." Laura worked quickly, stripping off his frozen outer layers, wrapping him in blankets, putting hot coffee in his shaking hands. The ranch hands arrived one by one, all of them showing signs of the brutal night. Laura made food, hot coffee, and found dry clothes for everyone. The men crowded into the main room, thawing out by the fire. "Lost the barn roof on the south side," Pete reported grimly. "Going to need repair once this storm breaks." "How many head did we lose total?" Samuel asked. "Maybe 10, 12. Hard to say until we can do a full count." It was a blow. Losing livestock in winter was expected, but it always hurt, both emotionally and financially. Laura saw the defeat in Samuel's shoulders and moved to stand behind him, her hands on his shoulders, offering silent support. Thomas, who had been quiet in the corner, suddenly piped up. "Papa, will the cows be okay?" Every head in the room turned to look at the boy. It was the first time Thomas had called Samuel Papa in front of the ranch hands. Samuel's eyes met Laura's, and she saw the sheen of tears there. "Most of them will be fine, son," Samuel said, his voice rough. "We will take good care of them." Thomas nodded, satisfied, and went back to playing with the toy horse Samuel had carved for him. Pete caught Samuel's eye and gave him a small nod of approval. The other hands smiled. Their boss had a family now, and it was clear to everyone that it was exactly what he had needed. The storm finally broke 3 days later, and the work of repairing the damage began. Samuel hired extra help from town, and Laura kept everyone fed, her kitchen a constant hub of activity. Thomas helped where he could, carrying small tools, fetching water, his chest puffed out with importance at being useful. Spring came eventually, as it always did, and with it came new life. The cattle started calving, the chickens laid eggs in abundance, and the mare that had given birth the night Laura helped Samuel foaled again, this time without complications. Laura planted a garden 3 times the size of the previous year, determined to put up enough preserves to see them through the next winter. One warm May evening, Laura asked Samuel to sit with her on the porch after Thomas had gone to bed. She had been feeling strange for weeks, tired and queasy in the mornings, and she was fairly certain she knew why. "Samuel, I need to tell you something," she said, taking his hand. He looked at her, concern immediate in his eyes. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," she said, a smile playing at her lips. "At least I do not think so, but I am fairly certain I am with child." Samuel's face went blank with shock. "You are, I think so. All the signs are there." He pulled her into his arms so suddenly she gasped. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Laura asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Samuel said. "Thomas will have a brother or sister. We are going to have a baby, Laura." They told Thomas a few weeks later, when Laura was certain. The boy's reaction was mixed. He was excited about the idea of a sibling, but worried about whether Samuel and Laura would still love him as much. "You are my first son," Samuel told him seriously. "Nothing will ever change that. You will always be special to me." "But the baby will be really yours," Thomas said, his small face troubled. Samuel knelt down and took the boy's shoulders gently. "You listen to me, Thomas. You are really mine. The baby your mama is carrying is your brother or sister, and yes, I will love that baby, but I love you just as much. You are my son in every way that counts. Do you understand? Do you promise?" Thomas asked, his voice small. "I promise, cross my heart." Thomas threw his arms around Samuel's neck. "I love you, Papa. I love you too, son." Laura watched them with tears in her eyes, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She had been so afraid, coming to Wyoming with nothing but a hungry child and a desperate prayer. Now she had a husband who loved her, a home, and another baby on the way. It felt like a miracle. The pregnancy was not easy. Laura was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep anything down. Samuel hovered anxiously, making her rest, bringing her crackers and weak tea, doing everything he could to ease her discomfort. The ranch hands picked up the slack, cooking their own meals and mending their own clothes without complaint. By July, Laura was feeling better, her belly beginning to round noticeably. She reveled in the feeling of the baby moving inside her, and Samuel would spend hours with his hand on her stomach, marveling at each flutter and kick. "Boy or girl, do you think?" he asked one night as they lay in bed. "I do not care as long as the baby is healthy," Laura said. "I was thinking," Samuel said slowly, "if it is a boy, maybe we could name him after your father. You have mentioned him before, said he was a good man." Laura turned to look at her husband, touched by the offer. "His name was James." "But Samuel, are you certain? Do you not want to name him after your father?" Samuel's face darkened. "My father was not a good man. I would rather honor yours." Laura knew Samuel's past was painful. He had told her bits and pieces about a father who drank and a mother who died young, about running away at 16 and making his own way in the world. She kissed his cheek gently. "James it is then, if it is a boy. And if it is a girl, you choose," Samuel said. "Something pretty." "Rose," Laura said, "after my mother." The months passed in a blur of preparation. Samuel built a cradle with his own hands, carving delicate designs into the wood. Laura sewed tiny clothes, her stitches small and perfect. Thomas helped with everything, his initial worry about being replaced fading as he saw how excited his parents were to include him. In late October, Laura's pain started. The midwife was summoned from town, and Samuel paced the floor of the main room while Laura labored upstairs. Thomas stayed with Pete in the bunkhouse, too young to understand what was happening but old enough to know it was important. The labor was long and difficult. Laura had forgotten how much it hurt, how exhausting it was. But Samuel stayed with her, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement. The midwife finally ordered him out, saying he was making Laura anxious with his own worry, but Laura refused to let him go. "He stays," she panted between contractions. "I need him." Finally, as the sun was rising on a new day, the baby came. The midwife caught the infant, cleared its mouth, and smiled. "It is a boy, and he has got good lungs." The baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy. Laura collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but elated. Samuel stared at his son with wonder, tears streaming down his face. "James," Laura whispered. "His name is James." The midwife cleaned the baby and handed him to Samuel. The rancher held his son with trembling hands, staring down at the tiny red face, the miniature fingers that gripped his thumb with surprising strength. "Hello, son," Samuel said softly. "I am your papa. I have been waiting for you." Laura watched them, her heart overflowing. She had 2 sons now, and a husband who loved them all. The journey that had started with desperation and hunger had led to this moment of perfect joy. Thomas was allowed up to meet his brother later that day. He approached the bed cautiously, his eyes huge as he looked at the baby in Laura's arms. "This is James," Laura said. "Your little brother. He is so small," Thomas whispered. "You were this small once," Samuel said, lifting Thomas up to sit on the edge of the bed. "And now you are a big brother. That is an important job." "What do I have to do?" Thomas asked. "Help take care of him, protect him, teach him things as he grows," Samuel said. "Can you do that?" Thomas nodded seriously. "I will be the best big brother ever." The baby opened his eyes, dark blue like all newborns, and seemed to look right at Thomas. The boy reached out one finger and touched his brother's hand. James's fingers curled around Thomas's, and the older boy's face lit up with delight. "He likes me," Thomas exclaimed. "Of course he does," Laura said, smoothing Thomas's hair. "You are his brother." That night, with both boys asleep and Laura resting comfortably, Samuel stood at the window of their bedroom and looked out over his ranch. His ranch. His family. His life. Everything he had ever wanted was under this roof. Laura woke and watched him, seeing the peace in his profile. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Samuel came back to the bed and sat on the edge, taking her hand. "I am thinking about the day you drove up in that wagon, you and Thomas, with nothing but hope and determination. I am thinking about how I almost sent you away." "But you did not," Laura said. "Thank God," Samuel said fervently. "You changed everything, Laura. This ranch was just a place I worked before you came. Now it is a home. You gave me that. You and Thomas, and now James. You gave us everything too," Laura said. "Safety, security, love." "I was so scared that day, Samuel. I did not know how I was going to feed my son the next day. And then you offered us a chance, and that chance turned into a family." Samuel leaned down and kissed her gently. "I love you, Laura Keller. I love you too, Samuel Keller." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered, growing year by year. Samuel added more land, more cattle, and built a reputation as one of the best ranchers in the Teton Valley. Laura was known for her kindness, for the way she always had a meal ready for travelers passing through, for her work with the church in Victor. Thomas grew into a strong, capable young man, working the ranch alongside Samuel. He never questioned his place as Samuel's son, never felt less than because he had been born to another man. Samuel made sure of that, treating Thomas with the same love and pride he showed James. James grew up adored by his older brother, the 2 boys inseparable despite their age difference. Thomas taught James to ride, to rope, to do all the things Samuel had taught him. The brothers were different in temperament, Thomas steady and serious, James quick to laugh and always getting into mischief, but they loved each other fiercely. 2 years after James was born, Laura gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose as they had planned, and she was the image of her mother, with dark hair and gentle eyes. Samuel doted on his daughter, the tough rancher turning to absolute mush whenever Rose smiled at him. When Thomas was 12 and James was 6, Laura found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was unexpected, and she worried about her age, but the baby came easily and healthy. Another boy they named David. The ranch house that had once seemed so large and empty was now full of noise and life. Children's laughter echoed through the rooms, and Laura could barely keep up with the cooking and cleaning, though she would not have traded it for anything. Samuel hired a girl from town to help with the housework, seeing how exhausted Laura was, and the extra help made a world of difference. On Thomas's 18th birthday, Samuel called the young man into his study. Thomas came in nervously, not knowing what to expect. Samuel gestured for him to sit and then pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Thomas, you are a man now," Samuel said. "And I want to make something official that has been true in my heart since the day I married your mother." He pushed the papers across the desk. Thomas looked down and saw they were adoption papers, making Samuel legally his father, changing his last name from Adams to Keller. "I know I have been your papa for a long time," Samuel said, "but I want it legal. I want everyone to know that you are my son, my heir, that this ranch will be yours and your brother's someday, if you are willing." Thomas stared at the papers, his eyes filling with tears. "You want to adopt me?" "More than anything," Samuel said. "You are my firstborn son, Thomas. You always have been." Thomas came around the desk and hugged Samuel hard. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking. "Yes, I want that." They rode into Victor the next week and signed the papers in front of the judge. Thomas Keller rode back to the ranch with his head held high, official son of Samuel Keller, and Laura cried happy tears when they told her it was done. The years continued to pass. Thomas fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher and married her when he was 22. Samuel and Laura welcomed their daughter-in-law into the family with open arms, and soon there were grandchildren, filling the ranch with yet another generation. James chose to go to school in Cheyenne, wanting to learn about business and banking. Samuel supported his son's choice, even though it meant James would not work the ranch full-time. Rose grew into a beautiful young woman who had her mother's kind heart and her father's business sense. David was still a boy, but already showing signs of being a natural rancher like his father and oldest brother. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Laura took a rare day away from the ranch. They rode up into the mountains, just the two of them, to a meadow filled with wildflowers. They dismounted and walked hand in hand through the flowers, breathing in the clear mountain air. "You remember the day we met?" Samuel asked. "Every detail," Laura said. "I was so desperate, so afraid, and you were so kind." "You were the bravest woman I had ever seen," Samuel said. "Coming west alone with a child, willing to do anything to take care of him." "I whispered to you that day that I had a son from before," Laura said, remembering. "I was so scared you would turn me away because of it." Samuel stopped and turned to face her, taking both her hands. "And I told you that now I had a son too. That was the truest thing I have ever said, Laura. Thomas was my son from that moment, and every child we have had since has just added to our blessing." "We have had a good life," Laura said softly. "The best," Samuel agreed, "and it is not over yet. We have got years ahead of us, grandchildren to spoil, the ranch to build up for our sons." They sat in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking about the past, making plans for the future, comfortable in the love they had built over 2 decades together. When they returned to the ranch, they found the whole family gathered for a surprise party. Thomas and his wife had arranged everything with help from James, who had come home from Cheyenne for the occasion. Rose had baked a cake, and even young David had helped decorate the house. Surprise! The children chorused when Samuel and Laura walked in. Laura's hands flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes at the sight of all her children, her grandchildren, all there to celebrate. Samuel pulled her close, his arm around her waist, and looked at the faces of the family they had created. Thomas raised a glass. "To Ma and Pa," he said, his voice strong and sure. "Thank you for showing us what love looks like, for building a family that we are all proud to be part of. Happy anniversary." "To Ma and Pa," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Samuel kissed Laura's temple and whispered, "Thank you for driving up that dusty road 20 years ago." "Thank you for giving us a chance," Laura whispered back. The party went late into the night, filled with laughter and music and stories. The grandchildren fell asleep in piles on the floor, and the adults talked around the big kitchen table, the same table where Laura had cooked so many meals, where the family had shared so many moments. As the guests began to leave and the house finally quieted, Samuel and Laura stood on the porch, looking up at the stars just as they had done on the night he proposed. "I never imagined my life could be this full," Samuel said. "I thought I would always be alone, working this land with no one to share it with." "I never imagined I could be this happy again," Laura said. "After my first husband died, I thought the best I could hope for was survival. You gave me so much more than that." They went inside to find Thomas banking the fire in the main room. He looked up and smiled at his parents. "Good party, the best," Laura said, hugging her firstborn. "Thank you for arranging it." "You two deserve it," Thomas said. "You have given us everything. It was the least we could do." After Thomas left, Samuel and Laura climbed the stairs to their bedroom. They could hear Rose in her room, singing softly to herself, and David's gentle snoring from his room down the hall. The sounds of their children, safe and happy under their roof. In bed, Laura curled against Samuel's side, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked. "Not a one," Samuel said without hesitation. "You? Only that I did not find you sooner," Laura said. Samuel chuckled. "We found each other at exactly the right time. If you had come any earlier, I would not have had the ranch built up enough to support a family. Any later, and I might have been too set in my ways to take a chance on a woman with a child." "God's timing," Laura murmured, her eyes drifting closed. "God's timing," Samuel agreed. The seasons continued their endless cycle. Winters were still hard, but the ranch was prosperous enough now to weather them without too much hardship. Springs brought new calves and new life. Summers were busy with work, and falls brought the satisfaction of a good harvest, cattle ready for market, the barns full of hay for winter. Thomas and his wife had 4 children, and they built a house on the north edge of the ranch property, close enough to help with the work but far enough to have their own space. James eventually came home from Cheyenne with a wife he had met there, a smart, educated woman who surprised everyone by falling in love with ranch life. They settled in the old foreman's cabin, the same one where Laura and Thomas had lived when they first arrived. Rose married a good man from Victor, a merchant's son, and though she moved to town, she visited the ranch often, bringing her children to run wild with their cousins. David grew into a quiet, thoughtful young man who loved the land even more than his father did. He was the one who suggested new breeding programs for the cattle, who experimented with different grasses, who pushed the ranch into the new century. On a cold December evening in 1906, Samuel and Laura sat by the fire in the main house. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their hands marked by the work of decades. But their love had only deepened with time. "Hard to believe it has been over 24 years since you drove up in that wagon," Samuel said, echoing the conversation they had had so many times over the years. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Laura said. I can still remember exactly how scared I was, how hungry Thomas was, how much I needed someone to give us a chance. And sometimes it feels like you have been here forever, Samuel said. Like the ranch was just waiting for you and Thomas to arrive to become complete. There was a knock at the door and David came in, stamping snow from his boots. "Fire in the bunkhouse stove is smoking again, Pa. I think we need to get the chimney swept." "I will take care of it tomorrow," Samuel said. "Everything else secure for the night?" "Yes, sir." "All the stock is bedded down, barns are tight. Thomas and I checked everything." "Good man," Samuel said. After David left, Laura said, "He is going to run this ranch someday, you know. He has got the mind for it." "I know," Samuel said. "Thomas has his own place now. James has his business interests. David is the one who will keep the Keller ranch going into the future." "And his children after him," Laura said. "We have built something that will last, Samuel." "We have," he agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire, listening to the wind howl outside. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built together, from nothing more than a desperate woman, a hungry child, and a lonely rancher who took a chance on them. Samuel reached over and took Laura's hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles, a gesture so familiar and comforting that Laura could not imagine life without it. "I love you, Laura Keller," he said, the same words he had said countless times over the years, but they never got old. "I love you too, Samuel Keller," she replied, the same response she had given every time, meaning it more with each passing year. Outside, the snow fell softly over the ranch, covering everything in a blanket of white. Inside, the fire crackled and the two people who had found each other against all odds sat together, grateful for every moment, every challenge, every blessing that had brought them to this place. The ranch would continue. Their children would grow and have children of their own. The Keller name would be remembered in the Teton Valley for generations to come. But the heart of it all, the foundation on which everything else was built, was the love between a desperate widow and a lonely rancher who had both been brave enough to take a chance on each other. Years later, when Samuel and Laura had both passed peacefully in their sleep, their children gathered at the ranch to celebrate their lives. Thomas, now an old man himself, stood on the porch of the main house and looked out over the land his father had built. "Pa used to tell me that the day Ma drove up in that wagon was the luckiest day of his life," Thomas said to his own children and grandchildren. "He said she and I turned a ranch into a home." "What did Ma say?" one of the grandchildren asked. Thomas smiled. "She said Pa gave her and me a second chance at life when we needed it most, that his kindness saved us both." "They loved each other a lot," another grandchild observed. "More than a lot," Thomas said. "They loved each other completely from the first day to the last. And that love built all of this, gave all of us life. We are here because a woman had the courage to ask for help, and a man had the kindness to give it. Remember that." The family gathered inside the house for a meal, filling the rooms with the same noise and laughter that had echoed through them for decades. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, but the story of how it became a true home was never forgotten. Samuel and Laura Keller, the rancher and the widow who found each other in the wild Wyoming territory, left a legacy that went far beyond land and cattle. They left a legacy of love, of second chances, of families created not just by blood but by choice and commitment. Their story became part of the ranch itself, woven into every fence post and every room of the house, a reminder that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the courage to help a stranger and the wisdom to recognize love when it appears. The end.